Let's talk about composition next. Composition is a very important aspect of photography. This is where the art of photography comes into play. Photography is not just about the technical use of the camera, but is about producing a beautiful photograph. One of the problems of using a digital camera is the fact that each photograph is free. And we have a tendency of not thinking about the composition and the settings of the camera when we take a picture. Every time we press the shutter button, there's no financial cost involved. I still use film. I use a panoramic film camera, and every time I press the shutter button it costs me $4. So you can imagine that I'm very careful when I compose the picture and make my camera settings. So just imagine when you're composing the picture that every time you press the shutter button it's going to cost you $4. And I'm sure you'll find yourself spending a bit more time getting the perfect composition. Here are two examples. In the first example, we can't tell who this young child is in the photograph. There's a distracting sign on the left-hand side. In the second example, we have the same child in the same setting, and it's a much more pleasing photograph. We can see who she is, and it's a much simpler composition. Both these photographs were taken with a very basic compact camera. So you can create really nice looking photographs with a very basic camera. You just need to think about what you're doing when you compose the picture. Sometimes if you've got a fancy SLR, it doesn't mean that you're not pointing and shooting. So whether you use a simple compact camera or an expensive SLR, just spend a bit more time looking through the viewfinder to compose an attractive picture. Fortunately, with composition, if we understand a few basic rules, we can design very beautiful and attractive pictures. But before I talk about these rules and ideas as how to compose a picture, let's talk about state of mind, because state of mind is also very important. If you're running late, going to a travel location or a landscape location, or if there's lots of people there and you're generally feeling stressed, then you're not going to be able to compose as nice a photograph as you could have done if you're relaxed. So make sure that you get somewhere early. If you feel distracted or stressed due to the number of people there, then maybe it's better just to jump back in your car and go somewhere else where it's quieter. I've done this on a number of occasions. I find that I just can't create nice compositions when I'm late or there's 20 other people at the same place. So I'll just go somewhere else where it's more relaxed and I'm enjoying myself. After all, photography is about enjoyment. It's not about producing postcard pictures that have been done 30 times before. And now I want to look at a few of the basic rules of composition. The first one is called the rule of thirds. The idea of the rule of thirds is not to put your subject matter in the middle of the frame. As you can see here in this photograph of Mount Assiniboine, the peak is in the top right-hand third of the photograph. So essentially, your subject matter, which is the main part of the photograph that you're trying to show your audience, should not be in the centre. The reason for this is that the centre of a picture, whether it's a photograph or a painting, is visually very boring. So we want to move our subject matter away from the centre, whether it's to the left third, the right third, the bottom third or the top third. It doesn't really matter, just don't put it in the middle. Now we'll look at leading lines. The idea of a leading line is to use a line in the picture or in the scene and to direct your audience's eye into the main subject matter. Let's have a look at this photograph of Lower Yosemite Falls. The subject matter is obviously the waterfall, which is in the bottom third of the photograph. Now we've got two lines. One is the edge of the trees and the other one is the rock. Both of these lines are leading your eye down into the waterfall, and your eye just stays hovering around the waterfall in the picture. If the eye is darting around the photograph, then your audience has not found a centre of interest, and therefore the composition is not as good as it could be. So by using a leading line and the rule of thirds, we can direct the audience's eye into the subject matter, and then their eye should just be happy looking at the main subject. And they would find that a pleasing composition. So the leading lines and rule of thirds work very well together. The next example, we have a sea lion, and we have two lines here. One is the back of the sea lion, and the other one is the back of the sea lion in the foreground. Both lines direct you into the sea lion's head. Now of course this photograph breaks the first rule of the rule of thirds, because the sea lion's head is right in the middle of the picture. But when your subject matter is big and bold like this, then we can actually get away with putting it in the middle of the frame. In the next example, we have a picture of a yacht which is in the right hand third of the frame. We also have some rocks in the foreground. The rocks, even though they're not connected, act as a line and direct the eye to the right to where the yacht is. Now let's have a look at a cropped version of the same photograph. In this cropped version, the yacht is in the middle and there is no leading line. And you'll find that this is not as interesting a photograph as the previous version. The next thing we'll look at is framing. With framing, we're going to use vertical lines on either side of the photograph to draw the eye into the picture. In our first example, we have a really boring photograph. The mountains are right in the middle of the frame and there's nothing of interest here. Now let's look at the same photograph where I've walked a few steps backwards and now have a few trees on either side of the picture. The trees form a frame which pull the eye into the middle of the photograph and make it more interesting. So even though it started off as a boring picture, it's now a bit more interesting by using framing. In the next example, we've got short vertical lines in the foreground. Again, these are pulling the eye into the centre of the frame to make it more visually interesting. So using vertical lines on either side of the photograph can make a picture more interesting by drawing the viewer's eye into the centre. The problem with framing though is that some people just frame all the time, and this makes your work to be fairly uniform and it can end up being a bit boring to your audience. So use framing but don't use it too much. Now I want to talk about dominance. The idea of dominance is to make your main subject matter stand out from the rest of the photograph. An obvious way to achieve this is to have your subject matter as the largest part of the frame. So we can achieve dominance by size. Another way to achieve dominance is with brightness. In this example, we have a large mountain, significant clouds in the sky, but there is a small building in the foreground. However, the building is very noticeable, and that is because it is bright white. So areas that are very bright in a photograph, you will find to be naturally dominant. This can be a good thing if it's your subject matter, but if you have bright areas in the photograph that are not your subject matter, then it can cause a distraction. So be very careful as to what is bright and what is dark in your picture. If you have bright areas in the scene that were not the subject matter, then you can always use an editing program later on to make them a bit darker if you can't remove them. Now another way to get dominance is with contrast. We can have contrast in different aspects by having contrast in colour. In this example, we have some yellow trees against green trees, and the difference is significant and you're instantly drawn to the difference between the two. We can have contrast in shape, where we have a beach with lots of even pebbles and one pebble is very different than the rest. That contrast in shape is also very attractive and draws you to the main subject matter. In our next example of contrast, we have a small bright person against a large dark cliff, and the small person really stands out against the big cliff. Now another area where we can have dominance is by the use of colour. Colours such as red and yellow are a lot more visually dominant than greens and blues. That's why stop signs and warning signs are red, because they're a lot more dominant to our eyes and visual system than other colours. Imagine in our photograph of the small bright person against the dark cliff, if we had a red raft coming down the river. Your eyes would be drawn between looking at the person under the cliff or the red raft, and it will probably be distracting. So make sure that areas of your photograph or people with red jackets etc. are your main subject matter. If they're not, then your audience will be drawn to the areas that are bright and red in your picture and will be pulled away from the area that you really wanted them to look at. So quite often it is worth waiting for people to move out of the picture to get the picture that you wanted. It's important not to have too many subject matters in your photograph. If you do, then the people looking at your pictures are going to wonder what it is they should be looking at. So avoid overly complicated pictures and make them simple, such as this photograph of the wave in Utah. It's easy to create an impact by the use of bold lines and colours. Nowadays, when people use the internet, we scan a page for a few seconds, and if we don't find something that creates an impact, we'll move on to the next photograph or next page. So make something that will really stand out and that will interest people. If your picture is too busy, they'll just wonder what on earth are they looking at and move on. So in my opinion, less is more and simplicity is good. It's important to give your pictures a sense of place. If you zoom in too much, then the audience will wonder, where is this photograph taken? So don't just have sunlit peaks of mountains or wildlife with no surroundings. Otherwise, your photograph could be of a mountain sheep anywhere in the world. You want to be able to zoom out and show the environment in which the wildlife is in, or the environment in which these mountains are in, such as this photograph of Mount Assiniboine. By zooming out, we can show the full colours and the nature of the mountains and the area that this mountain is in. If we zoom in too much, we simply see a red triangular peak, which could be anywhere in the world. In our next example, we have a wonderful phenomenon called the spectre of the Brocken. This is like a rainbow around my shadow. When I took this picture, I was delighted to see this amazing phenomenon, and I took many photographs zoomed in of my shadow with the spectre of the Brocken. However, none of these pictures show where I was. And nowadays my favourite version of this event was when I zoomed out and you could see the surrounding mountains and the cloud and the environment in which I was standing. So remember to take photographs with a wider view that show a sense of place. Also with composition, it's important to have balance in your photographs. With balance, our subject matter is not all on one side of the photograph. So an easy way to do this is with a reflection, where we put the horizon in the middle and then our main subject matter is in the top third or the bottom third of the picture, such as this photograph taken in Canmore where I live. Let's have a look at another example of balance. Here we have a small piece of ice in Jasper National Park. The ice has a great shape to it and I put it in the top right hand third of the photograph. But without the ice in the bottom left hand corner of the picture, this picture would be very uneven. So I've used two different pieces of ice to balance one another and to give a more pleasing composition. Now personally, I don't like having too many distracting elements in a photograph, particularly having branches or leaves dropping into a photograph in the top. If you can't see the rest of the tree, then I find it to be quite distracting. Where have these leaves suddenly come from? So if you can, avoid having distracting elements such as leaves just suddenly appearing. If the leaves are part of a framed tree on the left side or the right side, then it works great. But just having leaves appear in this example can be quite distracting. Cropping a photograph can be a great help in post-processing. Sometimes in the field we can't stand in the perfect location to get the perfect picture, or maybe we don't have exactly the right lens. So we can take a slightly wider view and then crop the photograph later on to get the composition that we really wanted. This is much easier now with digital photography than it was with film. Important to avoid competing subjects. In this photograph we have two subjects. One is the waterfall and the other one is the rainbow. But which one is the main subject matter? Very difficult to say. In hindsight, I think I should have taken this photograph lower down. That would have caused the rainbow to come up in the picture and be part of the mist. which has actually formed the rainbow. So think carefully when you're in the field and move around so that you get the perfect composition. Quite often it's not possible to go back to these places and take the picture again. So let's summarise composition. In our opening example, this picture of Erin, I have moved her away from the centre. I've also made her more dominant, and I've done that in two ways. One of them is to get closer to Erin so she's larger in the frame. Another way is to use the flash on the camera. That's made her brighter and she really stands out from the background. I've also removed the distractions. I've cropped out the sign that was on the left hand side. And I've kept the composition simple. We just have Erin against the background. I've also moved around. By getting down to Erin's level, we have a much more personal view. It's my eye level is at her eye level. So quite often we're photographing our children, but don't photograph them from an adult's point of view, get down to their level and you get a much more intimate picture.